All right.
Thank you. Welcome to the first Curriculum Committee meeting of 2021. It's a pleasure to be with everybody tonight. If we could go around and just introduce ourselves to both for our own sake as well as any viewers, that'd be appreciated. I'm Adam Burke, a District 3 representative and chair of the Curriculum Committee. Roberto?
I am Roberto Rodriguez. I'm an at-large member and of the school board, a member of the Curriculum Committee. We'll pass it to Assistant Superintendent Malia.
Hi, Malia Nally, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, and I'll pass it to Gail.
I'm Gail Cressy. I'm the Director of Intervention Strategy, and I'll pass it to Jessie.
Hi, I'm Jessie Robinson. I'm the Director of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. I'll pass it to Barrett.
Hi, everyone. Barrett Wilkinson, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director, and I'll pass it to Kathy, who I got to meet briefly in the hallway earlier this week. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kathy Winchenbech, the new Finance Director. So I just started this week, and I thought I would sit into this meeting if that would be all right with everyone, just to kind of orient myself, if that's okay. And welcome and thank you.
That's fantastic, especially given our conversation this evening. And you didn't notice, Kathy, so I'll pop it over to, just because you were getting on, Lindsay.
My name is Lindsay Booth, and I'm the new Executive Assistant in Academics in the Portland Public Schools District Office, supporting Malia and team.
Hi, Lindsay. Sorry I didn't pass to you.
Just over to Ann, please.
I'm Ann Rothaker. I'm the District Office Manager and Executive Assistant to the Superintendent.
Thanks. Is that everyone? Gail, did you have a chance?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, great. Thanks. So we're going to note that we have meeting minutes that are published on Board Docs this evening, and we're going to note that we're going to attend to them at the February meeting when Member Bondo, who isn't present this evening due to being out of state and tending to personal matters. So we will bring up the meeting minutes to the February meeting for approval. I'll hand it over to you, Malia. Take us away.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm using... I'm using a presentation, which I can share afterward, but it is reflective of the agenda that was uploaded onto Board Docs, but it's just kind of a way for us to talk through the details this evening. Can everybody see okay? Okay. Excellent. So, well, sorry, folks, my thing is going crazy. Okay, now I just have a picture of Adam, member Adam.
While you figure that out, Malia, I'll just say that I am very excited to see the group of people that are assembled here tonight, and I look forward to doing the work not only tonight, but throughout the year with everybody. It's a good group of people.
Yes. Thank you. I couldn't agree more, especially when we have the full team here with Mickey joining us as well. So this evening we have a pretty meaty agenda, and I have up here on the top, I will try to help us manage our time. I have to be at a meeting at 7:30, so was hoping for a 7:29 stop in order to have a 1-minute transition to eat dinner. So this evening, we're going to look at the draft priorities that Adam shared at the last full board meeting, and just tune those. So Roberto, get your feedback on that to make sure they look right, or to discuss if there's anything missing. A very brief update on the equity policy work. That's why Barrett's here, just because that's the kind of big policy this committee is working on. So I want to always kind of come back and let folks know where we are with that work. And then finally, the larger discussion is to talk about some of the emerging budget priorities for teaching and learning, with the caveat that this is very initial look. The goal here is transparency, but this is, there's still a lot of iterative work happening. And so when we get into it, I'll remind you of that caveat. But my goal is to make this as transparent as possible and bring folks along as we try to figure out where we land with our ultimate priorities reflected in the budget. Anything to ask about our plan or objectives? To go? Okay, I'm looking at you, Adam, so your head will help me now. So these are the priorities that Adam and I worked on. We did look back at the priorities that were established last year, since, as you may recall from the board meeting, we did not accomplish everything due to stopping meetings in the spring because of COVID. So we looked at that. We also looked at last year's feedback from the full committee. And I know Member Bondo was on the committee then as well. So we were able to see kind of some of what the priorities were. And then, of course, we're thinking about our current work and priorities and wanting to be reflective of where the energy of the district is headed. So, Adam, is there anything else you want to just say about this? Or otherwise, I think it's just to look at this and see if you have any other feedback, and then Roberto, see if there's anything that you have questions about or feedback on.
Yeah, I'll just say that we did this in part because Molly and I were trying to practice working backward. So one, setting the priorities, and then setting out the first half of the year kind of agendas to make sure that we were on track to deal with these priorities, which I don't think we'll look at tonight because we're going to incorporate what comes up. But at the February meeting, we would share out so we could all have a sense of where we're going when.
So, Roberto, it's really you that we're looking at in terms of just, do you have questions or feedback, or does this feel like the right stuff from your perspective?
Yes, this does feel like the right stuff. I mean, this is, I think we have been transparent up to this point. Like, I'm very much aware of, obviously the equity policy work coming up and the rest of your priority items. So I appreciate the exercise that you and Adam have done, and I don't want to make it seem like you're only doing it for me. But I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, if it looks like the right stuff to you, perhaps, Adam, we could, when Mickey's back, just sort of email them and see if she has any thoughts to make sure those are incorporated. Does that seem okay to you?
It does, and I would just say, in addition to email, whether it's more appropriate for I or you to perhaps have a one-on-one with Mickey to catch up and talk through. I think that would be the best move for us.
Okay, awesome. So, Lindsay, if you can note that in the next steps, that would be great. And then the other next step is, after we have that conversation at the next meeting, per Adam's point, we'll share the kind of backward plan, at least sort of how we see these topics showing up between now and the end of this academic year. Okay. All right. I'm going to keep us rolling.
Malia, before you do that,
Oh,
just for the sake, if this is picked up, could you speak to number 3 a little bit? Just what the thinking is there, just since that's too sensitive an issue to glance over.
Yeah, great point, since I put it in red too. Just to really, yes. So I think Adam and I had a conversation about this and whether or not it, is, a question, is this still a strategy we're pursuing? And wouldn't it make sense for the curriculum committee to discuss and explore this, since really it's oriented around both our equity work as well as our teaching and learning work in terms of the reconfiguration, the opportunities that come for teaching and learning by having, for example, the pre-K through 2 sites and by mixing up the neighborhood school construct. So I mentioned it to Javier, and I know he's, not clear, at least right now, as to whether or not this is a strategy we are collectively pursuing in the near term. So I think it probably warrants still more conversation with him and potentially the board, but we thought it fit here because we thought it would be good to do some thinking and planning about it from that educational perspective, even though, of course, it was initially initiated through the budget work. So what else would you say about that, Adam, from our conversation?
No, I think you covered it adequately and well. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just so by the way, I didn't mean to glance over it. I kind of didn't even differentiate it from part of the budget strategy discussions, because I figured that's where most of that, even if it does become a clear path for this committee, it will probably be parallel to the decisions that are made through the budget development process. I didn't see it as part of that same discussion, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate the distinction being made here and you pointing out with clarity. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Well, we good then to move? Okay. So next we wanted to do the just progress update on where things are at with the equity policy work. I know you all know this, but just to say this for the recording, this is a policy that this committee is working on. Mickey is co-chairing this committee with myself and Barrett. So we're doing a bunch of offline work with a work group and then coming back periodically to have this committee look at the progress, tune it, and give more direction to where we head with it. So this is not an update where we're going to be looking at things, but we just want to let you know what's happened since we last talked about it. So Barrett, do you want to do the quick update on this?
Yeah, super fast is that we were able to put together a really wonderful cross-district work group that represents, a variety of stakeholders from inside the organization as well as parents, and start meeting. Of course, things are taking way longer than any of us want them to, and that's just like super real. But I still feel really good about it. We also, in consultation with the youth empowerment partners at Portland Empowered, had some great conversations with them about how to meaningfully engage students and what their involvement might like to be. Coming off of the Reimagine Education project they led over the summer, this felt really, was really relevant to that work. And so Muntaha offered to co-facilitate the student work group with me and to have that meet in addition to the full work group meetings to really give students more opportunities to participate, thing one, but also give them more opportunities to distill and talk about different aspects of this work as it moves forward. So that's what we've been doing. It's hard for students to engage during this time too. So we have a little bit of a revolving door, but Muntaha and I have kind of aligned around a plan for how to support them further in this. So at our meeting early this week, we had 2 students with the full work group as well. So the student work group tends to be a little better attended, but we do still have some students coming to the full work group, and they can they're certainly supported to do both. And through the grants that YEP has, they can support stipends for the students. So that's also really awesome, that partnership. So I'm super grateful to Muntaha for her collaboration and support in this. So we've also began the stakeholder engagement work, started having conversations with different groups of stakeholders about this. They started out being very kind of brainstorming as we, this committee reviewed the questions and kind of thought about what that might look like. As it evolves, it'll probably be a little bit more of a combination of some of that brainstorming and then looking at our draft and then seeing what the alignment is like. So that is going to continue throughout the process. And as we continue to draft, we have just started a draft definition of equity as well as a purpose statement to accompany the policy and really roughly outlined what are the sections that we think this policy relates to. And I think those are the big headlines I wanted to share for now. Leah, I'm not sure if I missed anything or if there's questions.
Yeah, no, I think that was fantastic. So yeah, if members of the committee have any questions, I think we're ready for them.
I have a question. Maybe not so much about what was just explained, but maybe a bigger picture of the policy itself as we're gathering the feedback or especially beginning the stakeholder engagement. So in the policy committee, as we were looking at some of the first discipline policies, last night a question came up that I think I thought would be really good to ask about our equity policy. So one of the first discipline policies, really in our discussion, we felt acts more as a discipline philosophy document. And it's a really strong document, and we're really, really proud of the way that it came together. So but the wording that was brought up was, is this more of an aspirational policy than a policy that has some actionable path behind this, right? Like procedural stuff. And I'm not necessarily saying that one gets us further along than the other. But I thought maybe we can talk about the distinction between, policy like this that is probably going to be more of a setting the philosophy outlook of equity, and really, as we've intended to do, really identify our definition of equity, versus other policies that are more, our procedural stuff and our process stuff. So I guess that's where I wanted to start the discussion.
I think that's a super good question. And I would say one that really was elevated at the end of our last meeting as we were kind of getting into it, where the definition really is that more philosophy and the purpose too. And wanting to have a clear purpose about it feels really good to do at this point, and to have it sort of enshrined through policy. But I do think that the sections of this policy would dictate some of the more specifics that would be more kind of traditional policy, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I see Malia nodding subtly, so I'm hoping that feels like true to her memory of the conversation. And we were even talking about, like, I was like, well, where does this one live? Because, like, I know about Book J, and I know, how does something like this, where does it live best? Because there's going to be pieces that are about staff, pieces that are about students, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just add to that, absolutely, this was the conversation we're having. So we're probably both in meetings at the same time having a similar conversation. But to the sections point, I do think that's where it asserts some expectations, right? So like an accountability section, right? Where that might call out things like expectations around the data we collect and the way we disaggregate it, so that would be more than a philosophical stance, but an expectation that we're held to because of the policy that's adopted. So same thing with, but it's interesting because then some people get into more specific examples that are actually things that would live in other policies. So the discipline policies is a great example where some people were headed there with that being in this policy. And in that case, we're zooming out and proposing a possible section that's just generally about student policies. And that's where there's an action-oriented expectation that for all student policies, they are evaluated with this framework for consideration, right? Some sort of decolonized and sort of equity-oriented framework. So, it's all still in development, but I think your point is well taken and very much live in the conversations we're having.
Thank you. I think that, and by the way, those conversations are really exciting, right? Because they force you to peel out of these layers of our system, of our organization, and as we've asked all of ourselves about this work, and we're charged to do so, we want to be purposeful in our intent and how we advance it, and we have to do that kind of peeling the layers of our organization to do it. I love it. I'm excited as I've been about this. I asked that question for that same purpose, right? So that we can all share that discussion and understand that where this eventually lives has a lot to do with the intent of the policy itself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Super excited and exciting. Thank you for sharing, Barrett. I just have a procedural question. Are these the cross-district work group, not the student work group, is the cross-district work group open to board members to attend if they would like to, or do you have a different agreement inside the work group?
I can start on that, Barrett. Let me know if you, I'm not sure.
You unmuted first, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure, although Barrett and I might say something different. We've had a super explicit conversation about that. We have, though, talked about wanting the work group to be a particular size in order to make it manageable, both from just logistical scheduling, but also from a collaborative perspective, especially through Zoom. How do we meaningfully advance conversations that result in decisions? And size of group does feel like it influences that. So I guess we haven't really talked about it. Also, just the concept of a fishbowl thing, right? If other people wanted to listen in and hear could be interesting. I think Mickey has like pushed us to sort of have these conversations, be bold and create vulnerability. So that's a dynamic too. So I guess I'm not really answering you. I think it's maybe a new thought, but Barrett, tell me if I'm forgetting something we have talked about with that.
No, I don't think we have talked about it. I wouldn't be opposed. Certainly, I think that's perhaps a conversation for the group. And I would just echo everything Malia said. The other thing I think too is like, when we think about, evolving the draft and kind of involving stakeholder input, like, yes, you're board representatives, but you're also parents in this district. You know what I mean? Like, you have layers to what you care about. And so, so I wonder if there's a way to like kind of have that, have a more open stakeholder session at some point as it gets closer, which I certainly can imagine. I think right now would be hard because it is like, it's so drafty and it's so, it's just a very, building toward that next step conversation. So I think we should keep checking in about it.
That's great. I'm actually kind of neutral in asking the question. I think it was just it was a procedural check in part, so I knew whether I was missing an opportunity that had been made available, and I trust the process. We talked about it thoroughly last year, so knowing how the work group is brought together, the process that's utilizing, and then of course the whole board procedural process. So no worries there.
Okay. Great. Well, any other thoughts or questions? This was just a kind of a quick update. So anything else that you're wondering about in terms of where we are at this point?
Just real quick on the review of equity policies from other districts. I knew that one of the first times that I jumped in a curriculum committee meeting last year about this, there were a couple of model policies that were put out there. I don't remember where those districts were or what those cities are, but I do remember reading some exciting language. Where can I find some of those model policies that we've been looking at just for, to get caught up on that?
I have a folder where I've just been putting them, and I wouldn't say that they're necessarily all model policies. It's just some that we've been reviewing. So I'll just share the folder with you so you can see them.
Yeah, it'd be great to read through them. Yeah, absolutely.
And when you're popping into them, I would suggest one of the first ones to check out again is Baltimore. We had our work group review, and that was the one that most people named as resonating most. So just if you were trying to look for a starting point, that might be a place that has some language that resonates. Is that right, Barrett? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, Baltimore, Portland, the other Portland.
Yeah, that's right.
And as soon as you said Baltimore, I think that might have been one of the first ones that was shared in the curriculum committee.
Yeah.
And that's definitely in this folder. And Gorham Public Schools passed I think it's an anti-racist policy statement. So I put that in, if you want to read that. But I'll share that with you momentarily.
That'd be great.
And I think I will leave you in the capable hands of my colleagues.
Thank you, Barrett.
Thanks, Barrett.
Great. Okay, to move forward, Adam. Okay. So now, I just want to pause and welcome Brooke Teller. Hi, Brooke. The most famous PPS employee nationally. I think, how many articles have you been in now, Brooke, this year?
I'm not sure, but the latest will be CBS Sunday Morning is coming to do some filming at Lyseth on Monday to do a full national story of some sort.
Yes. So she's our in-house superstar. And also very humble. Of course, she's representing collective work. And so Brooke's here, and just so you all know, Fiona will be joining in 10 minutes. And so a couple folks from the team are in and out. And Jesse, actually, you weren't here before. Were you here before? Yes, you were here before. Sorry. So the goal of this conversation is, like I mentioned before, just continuing to build more depth of understanding as it relates to the way in which we invest in teaching and learning and what we are trying to do over time. This, like I said, is very, it's not like the firm and steady everything. This is what we're doing, but we're trying to kind of preview for you some of the places where we want to invest and some of the places where it would represent increases relative to what we're doing right now. So, we definitely don't have all the answers. You'll notice probably some transparency among us at certain points about like still getting a line, but even though I'm a little trepidatious about transparency early on when we don't have it all polished and locked up, my experience has been that the more transparent we are along the way, the better. So we'll see. I'm hoping that's our experience. So this is just a recall from the last time we looked big picture at the academic budget. And so it's just a reminder, last year it was just under $1 million, which amounts to less than 1% of the total budget. And a reminder that last year we reduced the academic budget by $140,000 when we were making cuts.
And just at a high level, or perhaps you're about to, can you just say what, since it's not about the FTEs, which is over on the personnel side, what is included in the 905,000?
Yeah, so that would be curriculum assessment. Last year, a lot of the pre-K stuff that's obviously not the people, and professional development, any kind of coaching and consulting. Gail, any other big categories I'm missing?
Books and supplies. So the elementary math adoption was a big ticket item under the books category. Those are really the contracts for assessment, the employee training, and books and supplies. The stuff of curriculum are the major categories.
There's also educational technology programs in here as well. Okay.
Thanks. And do you want to speak to where the 141,000 came from and any impacts to note?
I think, I can't remember if we shared that in the last time, but it was shading all over the place, but a big place was social studies and science. So we had hoped to make some forward movement in those areas, but basically cut it all out. And then we made reductions across the board to some coaching, some consulting, professional development. Gail, any other biggies that we cut out that you remember?
There was some reduction in assessment where we did a step back on NWEA, that the contract we had with them. There was a little bit of a reduction in some of our intervention software as we got tighter on exactly what people needed versus leaving more of a cushion. So we just got some of it we got really tight on the budgeting process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just use this opportunity to say that Gail's role within the academic team she's been really doing a lot of strategic budgeting work because Gail, as you all know, oversees our big federal grants as well. And so we're really trying to come at this with a clear understanding, given all of our revenue sources, like what can we make happen with the different pots of money that we have, given the priorities we have. And Gail really has a deep sense of the Portland Promise and the strategic priorities we're going for. So that's been huge to have her step into that perspective and really lift this, I think, in a strategic way. So these are the emerging teaching and learning budget priorities. The caveat here is that we just have had one significant conversation as a cabinet about priorities holistically. We have not even talked with our admin team yet about the totality of our emerging priorities for the coming year. So this is not comprehensive of everything we've talked about. This is a preview of the components that we've started talking about that are under what I would consider the teaching and learning umbrella. And so my hope and sense is that nothing here will be super shocking to anyone. But of course, but we're talking about it to make sure that at least further along the line, it's not in case it is now. So in general, in curriculum, we're looking to advance the implementation of some of the social studies work that's been happening with Wabanaki and Africana studies. So we've had conversations of this committee about, we've been working on this for several years now. And so we have some units ready. We're ready to roll with some of this work, and we're excited and hopeful that we can do that. The same would be true at the elementary science level. Brooke how long have you been doing the coaching and piloting and building?
So this is my second year officially as STEM coordinator, but I spent my sabbatical the year before that also working on this.
Yeah, so same kind of timeline, 3 years of work, of piloting, of some design. So wanting to activate, the work more broadly across the system. We want to sustain and deepen the math work. So when we get to that, you'll see that there's an extension into the upper grades as well. And then some work that's emerging around literacy that we're going to talk about as well. So curriculum is a big thing here. We've talked historically about the fact that there's been a very little amount we've invested as a district in curriculum. So my first year coming in here, the total curriculum investment in the academic budget was $75,000 for the entire district. And so and that was specifically tagged to buy workbooks for math for elementary school for the 2 programs that we had. And so everything else is stuff that schools are trying to purchase in their budgets, which I think, as you all know, are not very big. So by shifting our strategy toward a more coherent and aligned approach to curriculum, we're trying to sort of support that common work this way, rather than every school's buying piecemeal different books and things like that. But I just really think it's important this committee understands that context when you see some of these investments we're trying to make happen. The second thing is around formative assessment. And this is not something, even at the cabinet level, we've talked a ton about, except for that you all recall, actually, I think it was at our last board meeting when we were talking about assessment. So between access and the conversation that's kind of brought up, as well as the fact that the state is making a shift in the summative, there are external factors pushing our need to look more carefully at our assessment system. And we've been wanting to do this for a while. When we talk about our kids learning what we're teaching and what are we doing to course correct, along the way, we really, we haven't shared much academic achievement data with you all outside of the big summative. So we are really wanting to strengthen our formative assessment system in a way that's aligned with our beliefs and values around authentic assessment, multiple measures, and assessments that actually give us and our teachers information we can take action around. Behavioral health supports, we've talked a lot about social emotional learning, mental health this year. So we want to, and then there's a lot that's come up with our, discipline policies and need to invest in supports around de-escalation, things like that. So that's showing up here. We've talked about summer learning and re-engagement. I didn't know really what to call it, but my point here was trying to reflect not just the academic learning piece, but like the social emotional and human connection component of what we want to see happen in the summer. So that's a huge thing and something that we want to invest much more in this summer, given the context. LAU plan implementation, you'll recall that we did not advance any of the resources needed to fully implement our LAU plan. Continued expansion of pre-K and barrier reduction. So remember, we were talking about more seats, but also making the seats accessible to students by reducing the barriers that we learned about from families, such as transportation before and after care. Another thing that was in the proposed budget last year that we did not fund was completing the continuum for students with autism. So we have the BEACH program at the elementary level. We were able to accomplish that at the high school level, but we don't have programming for these students at the middle school level. And then finally, moving our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, starting to move that into the local budget. I think we've looked at this many times, and it's the stuff that's explicitly that. I mean, everything here is our DEI work, just to be clear. But things like Barrett's position, our PD around DEI, et cetera, all of that is grant funded and has been for 3 years, since the Portland Promise launch. We have not managed to integrate that into our local budget. So a desire to do that. So we're going to look at each of these pieces one by one with a little bit of some sort of budget perspective as well. So my recommendation is we move forward, and then if you have questions about any of these, they'll probably come up in the slides that are specific to each, but I'll pause and ask if that's okay with Adam and Roberto. Okay. So Fiona, I see your name. Are you here?
I'm here. Yes, I was just having a few computer glitches.
Well, Fiona, if you don't have your computer resolved by next Monday, I'm just personally going to go buy one.
I'm on Steve's computer right now, so it's good. This is lovely, this one.
Okay. So I'm going to just I'll probably do the quick framing for these things, but then have you be the expert folks to sort of say more and answer questions, just in the spirit of kind of getting through everything in the time that we have. Just first, I'll kick it off and say the priorities here are high level. They should feel familiar based on prior conversations we've had where Fiona's come and presented in much more depth about what's happening and what we're trying to make happen around our social studies curriculum. So those are reflected there. This year's budget had $8,000 total for social studies for pre-K through 12 in the system. Like I mentioned, I think we had tried to have like 35,000 or something, and that was cut to this amount. So you see a significant amount proposed for next year with the 250, and this is, curriculum across the system for, elementary, middle, and high school. And then underneath that, we've called out some of the key components of what makes up that amount. In addition, Fiona's done some awesome work, which was hard because I would not call long-term budgeting your passion, Fiona.
Definitely not.
I would describe it as pulling teeth. No, I'm just kidding. But we're really trying to think about how can we project where this is headed in terms and the resources that are needed. And in all honesty, it is really hard because we are creating a place-based homegrown curriculum. And it's the first time we've done this thing in this way. And so we don't have like some template that we're working from. But she has tried to look at the next few years and what would we have to invest to kind of get where we're going. So Fiona, do you want to say a little bit more about that? And then I'm certain folks are going to have questions about this.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk just for a minute about sort of the process that I was using while I've been avoiding doing this. A, because I didn't really have the information I needed, and B, because I knew it was going to be just super, super challenging. So what made it possible for me to kind of create some sort of a budget was that we have actually created one fleshed out Wabanaki Studies unit. And so I was able to sort of use that and project costs for that one unit and then multiply that across grade levels. So that was sort of how my process worked. I'll mention that I've talked here a little bit about the need for a sort of video component for the Wabanaki Studies curriculum. And that is, I have put like a placeholder figure into the budget that's proposed for, not for this year, but for next year. But I wrote my very first RFP and have meetings with filmmakers. So I will have a more accurate figure about what it would cost to make supporting video curriculum for the Wabanaki Studies work. And that's really because there isn't a central, there's no textbook out there, nor would you really want there to be for something like Wabanaki history and culture. but having a lot of diverse speakers from the Indigenous community speak to our students over the course of their time in the Portland Public Schools feels really essential to kind of breaking down the sense that Wabanaki cultures no longer exist, and also to kind of honor the oral tradition that is so central to Indigenous cultures and communities. So that is built into the long-term budget. And next year's budget really has an eye towards implementing that third grade unit that I mentioned, which is probably more expensive based on my projections than the other units will be. And that is because it relies heavily on field work. It is an interdisciplinary unit with social studies and science. It also really is tying in a lot of the equity mindset work that has sort of been lived in Barrett's universe, but really tying that into the curriculum. So that is in there. And then also fees or expenses for sort of paying for the continuation of growing this curriculum, because at this point we'll end the year with 4 Wabanaki studies units sort of in a good skeletal kind of form, but not 100% finished. And so I need some money to pay teachers to continue working on that. The Africana studies work will have a big overview by the end of the year, but then the real work begins next year of building all of the units. And if you think pre-K-12, you're talking 14 grade levels. And it's just a tremendous amount of work to build these things. And then there is the really important piece of an actual resource investment. So there is a really wonderful textbook called Black History 360. And that is brand new. And I'm not usually a fan of textbooks, but this is a particularly impressive publication that centers African American history as an American history core textbook. So in that proposed budget is also the expense of the projected cost of what it would be to buy that textbook for the high school level. That isn't a decision that the Africana Studies team has made, but it's likely that we might end up making that decision, and that would support 10th and 11th grade. And if you do the math out, so the total that I ended up with was somewhere in the neighborhood of, I can't remember if it landed at 700,000 or 800,000 altogether. But you divide that over the cost per person, we're talking about $100 investment per student in the Portland Public Schools in social studies over the next 3 years. Because I'm used to working with nothing, as you can see from the $8,000 budget. And so these numbers were staggering to me. But then when I multiplied it or divided it per student, it seemed pretty reasonable that $100 per student for an investment in actually having a robust social studies curriculum made a lot of sense. Anything else, Malia, you'd have me add?
I think that's perfect. I think we should just give some space for board members to ask some questions now.
Sure. I can't see everyone, so don't wait to be called on or anything.
Roberto, any questions?
Nothing that pops up. I think I'm just digesting everything that was just shared.
I meant to mention that this also includes costs for consultants for our tribal advisory board to meet. I don't know that they're a board. Tribal advisory group to meet and review curriculum, to be able to pay community members who have joined in the meetings for Africana studies. It's really my hope and aspiration that we'll be able to actually pay people for community members for participating in this work. That feels very important. And also to pay students and parents and other contributors beyond just teachers.
Which includes a payment for someone like Bridget Neptune, who's been consulting with us. I think there's a bit of an increase. We were looking at what we were paying her relative to other consultant fees, and it was not equitable. So we made an increase there to make it more comparable to what we pay consultants.
Yes.
Thanks for this explanation. I know I ask frequently, where are we going? How do we know where we're going? How do we know when we get there? When are we there? All those sort of questions. And this lines up with, questions and things that I hear from taxpayers, from funders, and just from my orientation in project management. So it's really helpful to understand what it takes to get where we want to go. I don't have questions at this point. Like, everything you said makes sense to me in terms of what it takes to build an entirely new curricular package that spans all our grades. Just one thing to note, and I think they're involved with your advisory group, but I have a body of work that will be with the acoustic band of Micmac, and I know they're working or going to work on a large series of videos, particularly for educational purposes. And their last I spoke with them, which was late fall, I think, of 2020, they're in the process of trying to determine what those things should be, what each video should be. So might be a good conversation to have to try to create, what's the buzzword, the synergy that was on the dartboard at some point, right? The synergy, but because they're trying to make content that would be relevant to younger people and students in their own community and otherwise. So you might be a great thought partner to help them narrow that in and help everybody out.
That's great. Thanks, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's keep going so we can get through all of these areas. I suspect as you sort of internalize all this and we keep going, you're going to have lots more questions, but our objective tonight is just this previewing, planting of the seed kind of stuff. So Fiona, thank you for joining us, and you're fine to sign off. I
have a PD to go to, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fiona.
Bye, Fiona.
Hi, everyone.
So next up is science, and same thing here. So the priorities you see up at the top, I think reflect some of the conversations we've had with Brooke previously in curriculum committee meetings. You see here again, we did the same thing with the science budget, slashed it to $8,000, which, what is that? Just over $1 per kid, actually, to use Fiona's analysis, if we look at it that way. But similar here, you see an increase in an investment, and it's comprised of these things that are kind of sub-bulleted. And Brooke did, just like Fiona, this multi-year look and tried to project where we think this is going. So Brooke, will you kind of do what Fiona did in terms of a little bit more voiceover, a little context on what's driving these increases, and then same thing if there's any questions for folks.
Absolutely. So in part, like the work that Fiona's doing at Talbot, we have been creating and starting to create our own units for science. And my hope is, and intent is, that for next year, the schools that want to roll out a life science unit will have a Portland Public School developed life science unit that is aligned to our currently draft science vision, but where we're headed for what we want science to look like for students. And the reason it's the life science unit is for a few reasons. One, it tends to be the area of science that teachers feel like they have the most just innate capacity for. Also, I see it as an ability to build outdoor learning into our science curriculum work. And thanks, Adam. And then one of the things that I'm proposing that we look at for our elementary students is having an anchoring experience such that all our students across the district have some field work, which I distinguish from field trip. A field trip feels like a passive experience, and field work feels like you're going to engage in an experience that's going to be of value to the curriculum that you're studying back at school. And with the equity lens, I want all of our students to have that same experience. So, Fiona talked about the third grade Presumpscot River unit. And so some of the field work for that will be going to the river. Additionally, we're working with Maine Audubon to try to get a grant funder to support raising salmon in all of our third grade classrooms across the district. So buying the equipment for the kids to raise salmon and then release them back into the Presumpscot River. So being able to have experiences like that. So those anchoring experiences are lending themselves to the budget for next year. The life science units, I actually had a grant from the Friesen Foundation, so I'm able to pay teachers with that grant to help me to develop those units. But the units that would be most difficult for teachers would be physical science. Chemistry and physics is probably not the background of most of our elementary teachers. And so we've had the opportunity at Talbot to pilot Amplify Science curriculum. And Amplify Science is an organization that came around after the Next Gen Science Standards were created. And so they built all of their curriculum on the latest and greatest standards. And they are highly ranked in ed reports. They have, is it green ranking, Malia? Is that how that, yeah. And what's been really fantastic about them is the literacy components are built into the curriculum. So when you get that curriculum, you get 5 to 6 books, one per child for your classes, that are the reference material, the in-depth about different topics. Our 4th graders are looking at waves and energy and how mother dolphins and baby dolphins communicate with one another, and how does a sound wave work. And so it incorporates that with it. And I think if the pandemic has lent some benefits, the fact that we had to slow down a little bit in the development of the life science units has allowed us to see how important embedding the literacy into a content area has led to a lot of success for all of our learners. And so, we have a lot of anecdotal and some access testing scores that actually support that assertion. So some of the budget is around purchasing from Amplify Science, the physical science units for 3rd grade through 5th grade. Should there be a surplus of some sort of money, it would be great to get the whole K through 5 range for physical science, but that's part of the rollout piece with the 3 years of budgeting. And then I just wanted to mention my other, I'm not going to call it a pet project, but my other project I'm really excited about is the concept of a mobile makerspace. And being able to bring STEM or STEAM challenges to our elementary schools so that each school doesn't have to support a makerspace, but we have one that can travel to them and offer some sort of week-long experience for maybe 2nd grade and 5th grade each year, where the other grades get maybe a shorter 1-day or 2-day experience so that we can go to all of our elementary schools and then potentially also be running STEM camps in the summer. And I had the opportunity to submit a proposal to Envirologics to help support the purchase and outfitting of the trailer. So we have to wait and see what they come up with for that. But I think that's everything, right, Malia?
Yeah, I just 2 things I'd underscore on that. One is that I believe that originally you had field work in this budget, and Jesse and Gail, we took it out, right? Because our thinking there was that we would repurpose field trip budget toward field work. And so just acknowledging that that's an assumption we're making without having had internal conversations about that and the implications of that. So wanted to make that transparent. And then just to underscore your comment, Brooke, about the interdisciplinary orientation of this work, I think that's something that Jesse and Brooke and Fiona and I and all of us are talking about. How do we start to teach literacy through engaging content? So not this idea that our teachers feel like they don't have time for social studies and science, but that students are learning to read and engage with text in a relevant context. And I think board members might remember Cindy Sewell joining our meeting to be honored as the Teacher of the Year in the state. And the number one thing she speaks to and talks to me about is that the thing that made like her biggest passion around science is that it dramatically changed the literacy scores for her kids and their ability to access and engage and learn to read. So I'm super excited about that. But yeah, let's pause here. Same thing, just any questions or reactions on this one?
I'm sorry, Malia. I don't think I followed you. What you said there about taking out field trips, and I understood what Brooke was saying about the intent of saying field work, but I don't think I understood what you said.
Yeah. Sorry. So we have in the budget now a field trip budget, and that gets allocated out to schools. Brooke had put into the budget for next year another big chunk of money for field work. And I said, let's take that out now because we already have money in our budget for field trips. And so the goal would be to reallocate that rather than to everybody who's going to their random fun places, that a portion of that would be repurposed toward the field work that's in alignment with this coherent curriculum. So I'm just acknowledging that field work. We're making an assumption right now at this early process that we can repurpose out of the field trip budget, but we have not had this conversation with our leaders to really talk about and explore, what that would mean for them if a chunk of that money is repurposed toward this end. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mr. Rodriguez?
Much like the first piece, obviously this is exciting stuff. And so I like the high level way of presenting it today. And as it keeps developing, I'm sure that there'll be all sorts of details that we want to dive into. But obviously there's a reason why these things are priorities, right? Like this stuff is exciting and So I think that as it develops more, I'll be able to better frame my questions.
Thank you. For myself, first of all, thanks for making dreams come true, these longer term projections. Also for the content more so, both what we were just talking about with Fiona and the content here. I don't know. I'm sure they're out there, but I don't think you're going to find a bigger champion than me to try to help see this through. So I appreciate you providing what I feel like I need to do that work in my position. I just have two clarifying questions. The first is, I'm just curious, who's the publisher of those text sets?
The text sets that come with Amplify Science are Amplify Science, which is the Lawrence Hall of Science. So they branches of that organization have done the FOSS kits over the years and things like that. So they've actually created their own literature to support it. And then because I work with Cindy Soul on this at Talbot, she, as a 20-year veteran of elementary teaching, is able to then say, and this fiction book would go really well with this. So she's able to supplement with the pieces that maybe are not in the text set themselves.
Great, thanks. And then with the Mobile Maker Lab and just maker education in general, do we have an informal or formal relationship with Project Zero out of Harvard's Graduate School of Education and Jen Ryan locally?
No.
Okay. Introduction I'm happy to make.
That would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, and just a reflection here too, just when we talk about decolonizing curriculum, I think people think immediately about Wabanaki studies or Africana studies, but I think this science work is decolonizing curriculum too. When you hear about going out into the river, and sort of getting that type of experience. I think the piece about the salmon is learning that scientifically, but that connects to the Wabanaki studies and what students are going to learn about what happened to the river and what happened to the fish historically. And so there's a whole other piece to that ties together. So I'm just so excited. I just want it to hurry up and happen for my own kids.
Yeah.
I know you're there, Adam.
Yeah. It's the same. To that effect about the tie-in, is there, this is me getting real dreamy, is Dr. Kimmerer involved in the publishing of any curriculum, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, really somebody that has that, the full aptitude and competency to do that, not just in the
Yeah. I think it's interesting. We've been connected through Maine Audubon with some folks that can help us with this, like John Banks, and talking about Indigenous ecological knowledge and how that meshes with Western scientific knowledge. And I'm actually going to be reaching out to Suzanne Greenlaw and her work on the emerald ash borer as I start to look at the 5th grade unit on invasives and like what that insect is doing to the brown ash and how that impacts our Indigenous population. So, I mean, I've learned so much because I share an office with Fiona. So I have an opportunity to really rethink what I did for 20 years in the science classroom. So, I mean, all of this has been an amazing learning opportunity. So, anything that pops in your mind, Adam, and you want to share, certainly shoot me an email because I think it's really exciting and important for our students.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. And you are welcome to stay, but also excused, which I think you're gonna say goodbye. But thank you so much for the work and being here to talk about and represent it. So
absolutely, thanks everybody. Have a great night.
Awesome. So, oopsie.
I'm sorry. Never mind.
Are you good? Oh, okay. So now we're going to look at math. This is one we've talked about before. And same thing here. I think what we're trying to do here is in the vein of decolonizing our curriculum.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you just refresh?
Oh, sorry.
One little change that we made. I want to make sure it's accurate.
Y'all educators and your 1,000 tabs.
Woo! I dare you to ask me for one thing and it'll give me 5 seconds and I'll find it.
I'm sure.
No, actually it drives me nuts, but those are all things I have yet to do before the weekend.
Thank you.
All right. There we go. So math, we've been at this for a few years. So this is something I think you all are a little bit more familiar with. We're shifting our pedagogical approach from a top-down, pour knowledge into the empty vessel, and if you get it the right way, you get it, and if you don't, you don't, to a launch, explore, synthesize approach where we are building from what students already know and the creativity that all of our students have. And we're thinking about math as there's lots of different ways to get to the solution. Math is creative and fun. It's not about memorizing an algorithm and regurgitating it back to your teacher. So this is the work we've been doing. You've heard of the illustrative math curriculum. It is aligned to that pedagogical approach. And we love it because it has sort of low floor, high ceiling opportunities so that it's got access points for all students. And it's not about if you get it, you're in the class. And if not, you get sort of separated into a small group and taught something else on the side. And so that's the work we've been at. And Jesse, why don't you talk about kind of, given that, where are we headed next year and like, why do these numbers look the way they look?
Yeah, great. So, I think at the beginning slide, Malia talked about deepening the math work. And so we're continuing on with pre-K to 8 and continuing with PD, continuing with, by purchasing the books and the licenses. And there is an increase in those because we're gone from the beta pilot to now this is the first year of the curriculum for K through 5, and they just increased the price of the books. So that's just like a logistical thing that you should know. But then we're also adding notebooks and licenses for during 9th through 11th grade. So this year they were piloting the 9th grade and they loved it. We actually had a teacher who was super skeptical about it, and she just came to a meeting and sold the rest of the department on it. So that was really great and exciting. And then I would also say, as the elementary and middle school teachers are in their second, third, fourth year of using it, the PD costs go down because we have internal capacity. So like our math coaches, for example, I just met with them, like, how do you want to do PD next year? They said, we want to get the PD and we want to give it to our teachers, as opposed to having the company do it for us. So the coaches themselves are the ones that are supporting teachers. And so they want to be the ones that are delivering the PD. So that costs less. Whereas in the high school, where more teachers are doing it, there's a greater cost there. And then another cool thing that's happened, the 48K that you see there, we have sort of a vision of what our math classes are looking like. So as we get deeper into our vision, our math vision, it sort of comes alive in the classroom. And one of the things is getting kids out of their seats and doing problems together at the board. And so in order to facilitate all students doing that at the same time, we need more whiteboards. And so that is what that cost is there. So again, sort of an actualizing of this vision of all students being mathematicians and all students bringing their agency to this work.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessie. I'll tell a little short anecdote on the whiteboard point. We still have in our high schools teachers that are using chalkboards. So I had a teacher grab me in a parking lot when I was not in work mode and literally was like, what can I do to convince you to help me have a whiteboard in my classroom? Because she's a math teacher, right? And we want to do this kind of work. And it's, having kids go up with chalk and, it's just, anyway. So, great. So same process here. Anything you all have questions about or just want to have a reflection about hearing where we're at with this work?
I have a I don't even know where to start with my question. I wanted to ask about. So first of all, I remember when I first started to just learn more about the vertical math team work and the continuum that we're trying. So I totally understand fundamentally what's happening there. And what I'm struggling to ask now is I've been over the last few weeks learning a lot about some of our like mentoring programs, and particularly the math motivators, I think is what it's called. So I was just out of discussions that I've had about that, and that being fresh in my mind, I'm asking this: how much of like stuff? I hate using the word stuff. How much of interventions like this, like what the math motivators do, is part of the continuum of the vertical math continuum? Because that is, I understand from a program like that the teachers have some input so that they're trying to get alignment between these volunteers and what is happening in the classroom, so that they're not just like volunteers going there just doing, based on their own experiences. So anyways, does that make sense as a question, or is this just not the right place to have that talk?
It does. Do you want me to respond, Malia? Yeah, so I worked with the math motivators because I ran the Freshman Connection summer program, and we worked with them. It's kind of like an offshoot of them, anyway. But I think it gets to this idea of how do we supplement what is happening in the core classroom, right? And so it's interesting that you bring this up because, we've been really focused on core instruction because if we're always trying to fill holes without really shoring up what is happening with the teacher in the classroom, we're always going to be playing like whack-a-mole. So now that we have this really strong vision, we're beginning to think about what does differentiation look like? So how do we meet the needs of all students when they might struggle to access the curriculum, which is whether, there are a number of reasons for that. And And so we're taking a hard look at our interventions and seeing, do they align to our vision? We're looking at our practices, like Malia was talking about, students getting pulled out. What are they doing in those small groups if they are pulled out, and should they be pulled out, and why are they pulled out? Things like that. And so I would imagine, as we haven't talked about this with math motivators, but I think that's the general, I think that's what you're asking, is like, when does everything get aligned? And I think we're not there yet, but I would imagine over time, if, those teachers who work with them have internalized that vision, they would then, that would eventually happen. But because we haven't really done a ton of work in the high school where the math motivators, I believe, are, maybe I'm not thinking about a different program, but then it probably hasn't happened yet there. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I appreciate the way that you worded it, and I don't think I expressed myself well. I think the way you said it, like, when do we look at how these programs align themselves with the greater work? And I guess the main reason why I asked it, and maybe it's obvious, though, the reason why I started to look into it is because of all the talk about the lack of, rather the kids that might be academically falling behind, and I just wanted to learn more about some of the programs that we had in place, and I got to learn a lot about the math motivators, which I was like, really intrigued about. So then, as we were talking about the math curriculum or vertical math team, I said, when do we align these things? Because as I saw some value in this, I said, this will be even more valuable if it's aligned with what we're already doing, right? So anyway, I really appreciate that will be part of the process, and and that's all. Appreciate it.
I don't have further questions. As Roberto's been saying, like, exciting and following along, looking forward to more information that comes. And I'll just say, thanks again for making my dreams come true with the 3-year projections and help me understand the bigger and longer term picture. And thanks for all the hard work for where we are on this already. Look forward to doing more.
Awesome. That's great. And as we transition, I think I do remember in last year's budget conversations, people had questions about, our investment in coaching, and Tracy Zager is one of the experts that we have providing just incredible and deep expertise and professional development to our coaches. So it is our intention that Tracy builds our capacity internally, and so we can ramp down her contract over time, probably similar to what happened with Kelly Smith when she did workshop model for the district for years, where she just eventually was around for new teacher PD, right? So that as new people came, they were onboarded to the work, and it wasn't just like, if you were here when it happened, great, but if not, you don't know what you're doing. So we kind of imagine that happening, but this is a huge lift. I mean, this pedagogical reorientation, it's mindsets, it's skills, it's equity, it's math content knowledge, it's the shifts in the Common Core, it's all this stuff. So we need help with that. And Tracy really does bring an expertise that is a value add that's unique and adds to the team in a way that we feel is really critical and pivotal to this work. So awesome. Okay. I got to get going on my time so that we can end at 7:29. So Jessie, can you just speak briefly to this one, please?
Yes, I'll be brief. So 3rd year of phonics implementation. So all schools have implemented except one. And we're also digging into the literacy for equity instructional vision. So as we decrease our costs for phonics in terms of buying books and PD, we're increasing sort of, now that we have an emerging vision for what literacy looks like, sort of realigning with resources. So what that looks like next year is sort of books that are aligned to our vision around literacy, and kind of a ramp up in PD, I would say next year. But then as you look ongoing, sort of just like an ongoing PD, and sort of, readjusting with units as we go. How's that?
great and quick. Don't even know if they'll have any. Yeah. So I guess anything here. Just sort of continued planting the seed, showing you all kind of where we're going in the aligned resources.
Yeah, we can dig in deeper next time. I saw Roberto shake his head. No, nothing.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Okay. And then the next piece is around the formative assessment. So, you know, I mentioned we are trying to finally get back to, in a deep and real way, our comprehensive assessment strategy work that we've kind of picked up and paused on several times over the past few years. And so, you know, you see here this comment from Jesse that it's really about both the tools, but the capacity to use formative assessments, authentic assessments to determine the right next step for instruction. And so there's a little bit of an increase here, and you can see Jesse spelled out the few things that's driving that. One thing I'll mention is that we do have some budget, I think, still in here for NWA. Is that right, Jesse, at elementary?
Yes.
Yeah. And the state has talked about potentially using that tool as in place of the MEA. And if they did that, my assumption is that they would pay for that. So this, you know, again, this is all kind of preliminary stuff, but that's kind of what you're looking at here. Anything to add to that, Jesse?
Nope.
Okay. I'll keep going, and then will you interrupt me? How about if you have questions, and I can see you all if you want to wave and stop. Does that sound okay? Or do you want some think time to decide if you want to pause a minute?
No, with the 9 minutes we have, I mean, these are just huge conversations. We're not going to try to.
Yeah, exactly. This is perfect. Okay. So another hugie. So the behavioral health supports. So what's in our proposed budget is sustaining the PBIS work, the Positive Behavioral Intervention System, ramping up the de-escalation training, adding social work capacity. That's not in the local. There's some thinking around that in terms of that will show up more in an FTE conversation. Supporting and potentially expanding the SHIFA groups. The consultation of the social work department on culturally responsive and equity literate approaches. So this is Blanca Santiago, used to be a social worker on our in the Multilingual Multicultural Center. So work with her to both support and mentor people, BIPOC folks who are interested in social work. So she's actively mentoring them with a goal toward building a more diverse pipeline of social workers for the district. And then also doing coaching and consulting to the social work team, which is currently not diverse at all. And then some mindfulness resources as well. So there is an increase in the local that's driven by those pieces there. We have funded a lot of this work historically out of Title IV. There is opportunity in Title IV. So, you know, when we get to having to fine tune and make hard choices, there's some potential opportunity, I think, for some of this to go there. But we just wanted to make visible what the key work is around this. Would you, anything on that, Gail, that I'm misrepresenting?
I would just say a combination of that federal Title IV money and some private grants along, you know, which is true in each of these areas and so you're getting sort of the comprehensive picture of the needs for next year and then a future look. And then because we just don't know right now what our funding is in those other areas.
Thanks, Gail. This one I can imagine we want to do like a broader update on, like report on potentially. So there's a lot more to dig into there, but that's kind of highlighting that piece. Same thing here. I think we're going to come to, Finance Committee on Breathe, but just Chris McCarthy, I was about to call him McCarthy like we're on the sports team. I call him McCarthy because we've got all these Chris's. So I'm like circa back when I was a sports player. A sports player. That really makes me sound sporty. I really was sporty.
I like sports ball too.
Anyway. So the thing here is just something we've been tracking on, which is the strategy in terms of Breathe when we're adding supports to the Breathe continuum was increasing our projected revenue potential there through being able to bill. And that has proven really challenging. You remember last year we missed the target in terms of revenue. So coming in, Chris McCarthy was aware that this was a big priority to untangle and figure out. And as he's been digging and digging, he's, finding a lot of the complexities with it, frankly. It's interesting. He was the director of the Real School in Brunswick, and they did not bill because of how complex it was. It was like their calculation that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And I'm putting words into their mouth that might not be accurate. So just want to be clear about that. But there's something about that. So we do think that we have a path forward on this, but we're really actively working it through. And so I'm just flagging it here in the budget context, because if something were to shift in like a significant way around the revenue target that we have projected to support the programming that we have, obviously that's critical to raise up in the budget context. So I'm just sort of, again, planting the seed on that, though we shouldn't talk about it more because we're still gathering more information. And so it's too premature, but just since I'm flagging all this stuff, I want to have this on the radar as well. Okay. And then summer learning, checking my time. Oh boy. So this is, we today actually spent a few hours in conversations with administrators sort of at the generative level, like what's our hope for what we want to like do? What's the problem we're solving for? What's the priority we have in the summer? Some people are super focused on like, learning loss, which I know is a trigger word for Adam. Other people are really focused on this concept of our kids just need to be together as human beings and figure out like, how do you do that again? And so there's lots of thinking. We're working on that. I'm not going to get into this here because I do imagine that this will be a board update, I think probably that we should do with you all. But the big upshot is that we anticipate and hope for a more significant investment in the summer work. And so Gail is, in her brilliant self, trying to help us think of how could we project a budget for this when we haven't landed the strategy. And that's like, that has integrity to it. Right. And so here you'll see that, Gail, could you do a 2-minute max, a 1-minute version of this?
Sure. Just the top section is just a reminder on where we've been with the local budget, which is pretty small. And we've been set off to fundraise to provide this service for students. And so basically in approaching the budget process, it's like, what is our commitment? What is the scope that we have to enact a strategy? Because that will impact the strategies we can use. So do we want to level fund it at last year's level with a slight increase for salaries and benefits? Do we want to revisit the expansion proposal that I brought forward last year, which a little more than doubled to sort of close the gap between students' performance and also the number of low-income students we have and how many students we're able to serve and start to close that gap? Or do we want to go bold and really look at sort of each school's low income measure, those students that are directly certified for free and reduced lunch, and provide a per pupil that seems like it could offer something meaningful for students. And I'm starting at a $500 per student mark based on prior programs that have shown some effectiveness. And you pretty quickly get up to $1 million investment for summer. And just as a reference point, we as you know, we spend about $14,000 per student for the school year. And so to try to look at how does that compare to a shorter summer program? And the research really looks at a 100-hour program as being impactful, particularly in the area of math. So at that rate, 100-hour program, we'd be investing $1,400 per student for summer. Understanding that not all the components maybe cost the same as school year, but just to give us a reference point for what a per pupil investment should be for summer programming. And so this is emerging thinking rather than just saying roll forward the budget and add a few $100s because of wanting to invest in summer in a more robust manner.
Thank you, Gail.
7:29.
You did. That was perfect. And I mean, this is a biggie. So I think we'll want to do a deeper dive into this more holistically. But I think to Gail's point, we are trying to figure out like this sort of chicken and the egg, like what do we want to do? What would that cost versus what are the boundaries we have in terms of resources? And then that helps us understand the scope of what we can start creating. So that's sort of the place that we're in right now. I'm trying to activate backward planning now because it's, it's February and we need to get rolling, especially like we've talked about even community partners, right? Where like we're helping kids go to Ripple Effect and things like that. I'm a mom and I'm already signing my own kid up for that stuff. So, I mean, the timing is real. We got to get going. I'll move us forward, understanding there's more to ask there. The autism continuum I mentioned, I feel like I kind of gave the high level there. When I opened this up in terms of this was on the budget, it was not funded last year. We never did the middle school. So that's kind of the gist. And then finally, just acknowledging that we're not speaking tonight to the pre-K expansion and barrier reduction priority, the LAO plan implementation, or shifting DEI investments into the local budget, because that will be coming forward to the full board in the next series of meetings we have. So we'll have space and time to dig into those then.
Thank you. Thank you all for being you. We're so lucky to have you. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? So moved by Member Rodriguez. I'll second. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks, everybody.